Welcome to the Author Blurb podcast. Here, we're here to connect readers and authors so that the readers, you, can find that book or that author you're going to love. So I appreciate you being here. Get ready, enjoy the show, enjoy knowing the authors, and remember, subscribe, tell people about the show, and go buy the author's books, because if you like listening to them and you think they're interesting, they're going to love hearing from you. Welcome to the Author Blurb podcast, where I'm here talking with Farrel Coleman, and you want to talk about somebody with a collection of books. Before we even started talking, he was correcting me when I thought he had a lot at 27, comes to be 32 instead. Reed, from the bit you told me, you've been called a poet in the crime world for crime fiction in different areas. You have a large selection of books to be read by people. You have a new one coming out. You sound like you have a whole lot of going on and been doing this a while. It's going to be much easier for you to tell everyone about yourself, and then we can go into discussing your books if you don't mind.
But if I tell you about myself, it's going to blow my, witness protection identity.
Well, give me the cover story and we'll go with that.
Okay. Quickly, I was born and raised in Brooklyn. I grew up in what most people outside of Brooklyn, I just tell them I'm from Coney Island because they've heard of Coney Island. Mm-hmm. I actually grew up on the border of Coney Island, Brighton Beach, Sheepshead Bay, and Gravesend. Let's see. I started writing poetry when I was about 12 or 13 years old. I was published by the time I was 15. I was the only guy I've ever heard of who quit the football team to become the editor of the literary magazine. So and when I went to college, I had three majors: philosophy, psychology, and English literature, all guaranteed to get me nowhere in life. And I figured I'd still write poetry and I'd have a regular job. This is a very famous thing that a lot of poets have done. T.S. Eliot was a bank clerk. William Carlos Williams was a doctor. Wallace Stevens was an insurance executive, so because poetry, let's face it, I have an old saying: if you want to be a writer, if you want to be poor, be a writer. If you want to be destitute, be a poet. So I did that. I went to work as a freight forwarder. I worked in the World Trade Center and the cargo area at Kennedy Airport. So all right. If any of the viewers or you have seen Goodfellas,
yep,
those are the people I work with.
Okay. Oh, that's okay.
Yeah. So, we had an old saying at the airport: if it fell off the truck on Tuesday, we were wearing it or selling it by Wednesday. And so once a week, I would go to the airport. I would go from the airport to a meeting in Manhattan, and there were many hours to kill. So I went back to Brooklyn College and took a night class called American Detective Fiction.
All right.
I was not a big crime fiction reader. I was more of a Kurt Vonnegut, Camus. I was a snob. I was a literary snob.
Okay.
So I took this class, and the first three books we read were The Continental Op and The Maltese Falcon by Hammett and Farewell, My Lovely. And the night we finished discussing Farewell, My Lovely, I came home and I asked my wife, would it be okay for me to quit my job and write novels?
Oh, I'm sure that went well.
32. Oh, yeah. Well, she said yes twice to me in my life, and has deeply regretted it both times. So 32 novels later, here I am.
All right. So now help me understand, because it's a little confusing since you were talking about poetry and crime fiction, but you're referred to as the poet of, I think it's hard-boiled is what you've been, and of noir. So, hint the poet of crime is where I kind of came up with that from the different descriptions you gave me. What is it? Are you putting poetry into your crime fiction novels, or help me understand that a little?
Well, one of the reasons that I uh, was immediately attracted to crime fiction after I actually read the masters at it was spotted in their writing the things I had learned studying poetry from David Lehman, who was my professor at Brooklyn College. And so what I spotted in there was that they were using all the techniques in prose that I had learned for poetry. Anybody who reads Chandler, for instance, will immediately recognize how he is just brilliant at using metaphor. And he has a great rhythm to his writing. See, that's the part of poetry people don't always get, is the meter and the rhythm of the writing. And Hammett's also, he was a different kind of poet. His rhythm was much faster than Chandler's. But I recognized in their work, gee, look how beautiful this language is. Both of them in very different ways. And in my typically overambitious way, I thought, hey, I can do that. I wasn't aiming too high with Chandler and Hammett. So
Right.
It is impossible for me to write prose without just naturally writing with a certain rhythm and an economy of language and the power of image. It's not as if I sit there and count out beats and go, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? It's not as
Right.
if I do that. It's just my authorial voice sounds poetic. And for that, I'm very happy.
All right. So now going into the crime side of your novels, what was the first story you actually wrote? Because try to dig through the 32 novels to figure out which one was first, second, third, and so on, would just be, did you start with a single novel or did you start off with a series? What did you do?
Well, after I quit my job,
Right.
It took me 2.5 years to write my first novel, which was called Life Goes Sleeping. And it featured a kind of a hackneyed Bush League insurance investigator named Dylan Klein, who lived out on the east end of Long Island, but was from Brooklyn. And what took me so long to write it was I didn't know what I was doing. I knew how to write poetry, but I had no clue how to write a novel. And, it pains me to look at my first two novels because they are so incredibly overwritten. They're entertaining enough, but they're very overwritten. And I like to say my first two books, I wasn't trying to write the great American novel. I was trying to write the great American sentence, every sentence, so that it wore me out, it wore the readers out, it wore everybody out. But, they got published.
Right.
And so I'm one of those very, very fortunate writers in a very small percentage who got his first long piece of fiction published as his first novel. By my third novel, They Don't Play Stickball in Milwaukee, I kind of had taught myself how to do it, how to calm down, and that not every sentence needed to be a classic, that some sentences are just there to do work,
Right.
And that was a good lesson to learn. And I think a lot of writers need to learn that. Everybody should learn that lesson, and not every writer does learn that lesson.
Right. Well, there's a lot of writers out there nowadays, and I've experienced quite a few that vary from amazing with, like you said, learned the lessons that you've learned, and others who, like me, maybe 3 novels in and still trying to figure things out every now and then.
Yeah,
So,
it's hard. This is a hard life. it's a hard life and it's a hard profession. And, you know, sometimes when I get down, I realize there's a lot of people in the world who give their right arm to have my career. So I have to remind myself of that sometime.
So it definitely is. And then what made you what got you to keep wanting to write is the big thing, because, you know, writing 32 novels of crime isn't something you sit there and sit down. I don't think you sat down when you discussed it with your wife and say, okay, I'm going to write crime and put in some of the things that most people would never think about doing. What was it that made you really keep writing this genre?
Well, it's funny because I don't think there's a very simple answer to that.
Okay.
The pat answer that all writers will give you, it's the only thing I was ever good at, right?
Yeah.
So that's part of the answer, is I was good at it.
Right.
Or at least I thought I was good at it. I like it alternates between love, like, and hate doing it. As I've taught writing, and I taught for a little while at Hofstra University, and I've taught individual classes, and I've always said to people, if you could sit alone in a room for several hours a day and work on something for a year, and knowing that you might be the only person to ever read it, if you're willing to do that, maybe you're a writer. But if you're not willing to do that, then, you know, go work at McDonald's or drive an Uber or do whatever you do, because it's hard. You know, you've interviewed enough writers, you know, it's hard. So I always was willing to do that. I had the dumb belief that I wouldn't be the only person to read it.
Right.
Because I could always force my wife to.
Well, there's two.
Yeah.
And occasionally you'll have a friend, they'll say, okay.
Right. Although they've learned and run away. Yeah.
I know the feeling.
I'm good at it. I like doing it most of the time. And I had success. I mean, that can't be poo-pooed. Like, it's hard. I understand when people give up. I really do. Because it is hard. And it's hard. And success, like, I'm not sure if my first novel wasn't published, how many unpublished novels I would have been willing to write.
Right.
So success has something to do with it.
Oh, it definitely does. And when you get your first novel published, I believe you probably have that spark or that fire under you to push you to go to the next and next and next. So perfectly makes sense to me. So here's something that you said that has me curious, is kind of a mixture of the fact of your writing crime, and then you talked about your airport job, and how much of that actually ended up in some of your earlier novels.
Well, you know, this is funny in that I try not to, from my own experience, take things that directly happened to me and put them in novels. And one of the things, like, cops have often said to me is, you get cops right. And it's because cops or criminals, whoever is a character in my book, I try to get their attitudes right, not their stories. Because cops will tell you endless stories about, you know, this happened and that happened, and we found shell casings in this precinct, and we moved them over across the street so the other precinct would have to catch the case. I mean, cops are just full, and I love them, and they're full of, you know, these kinds of stories. And it's true with criminals too. I've had the misfortune of knowing some murderers, or meeting them and knowing them. And that it's not getting what they did right, it's getting how they think of things right and how they feel about things. So being at the airport with all these mobbed up guys, right?
Right.
I sort of got the idea about how they think of the world, how they view the world, and my experience with cops, same thing. Plus, a really formative thing happened to me when I was 15 years old. I watched somebody die of a gunshot wound right in front of me. Like, I mean, literally 10 feet from me. And although I suppressed that memory for a very long time, it clearly made a big impression on me, because it shaped my attitude about serious crime. And so, it's funny. Before I really recalled how that happened, I had started writing crime novels. So, the brain works in very mysterious ways. So
that it definitely does. So, with your novels, what do you kind of focus on more? Do you look more at the side of the cops? Like, do you go more the hard-boiled, the procedural? I don't remember seeing a procedural in your. I have to imagine with 32, you have to have at least one.
well,
But
I wrote 6 Jesse Stone novels for the estate of Robert B. Parker, and those are basically police procedurals.
okay,
And to some extent, Sleepless City, my new novel, is partially a police procedural. So I have written procedurals. Mostly, I've written PI. I've written some I've written all sorts of books and short stories. So for me, it always starts and ends with character. That's the focus for me. Plot grows out of character, because characters, to me, suggest plot, and then they suggest setting. So I always start with that. I mean, if you don't have a great central character, a great protagonist, and great doesn't mean good, as in morally good. In fact, if somebody's all good or all bad, I don't find them very interesting, and and I don't think readers find them very interesting. So to me, great means a protagonist I can really do a lot with, that has big blind spots and foibles and stuff like that. So, that's where it all starts for me.
All right. Now, you talked about your new book coming out, Sleepless City. Am I saying it right?
Yes. Say it 5 times fast.
Yeah, let me try that. So, Sleepless City, that one there seems very interesting with the fact of the character. He's the main cop, or he's the cop's cop, to where I think the description said he's the man that the cops call when they need help.
Yes.
So you call 911 when you need help. The cops call. Was it Ryan?
Nick Ryan.
Nick Ryan.
Yeah. So I don't want to give too much away, but I'll give it away. Nick Ryan is a New York City police detective who has done 2 tours in Afghanistan and come back to New York with a very different sense of right and wrong. War will do that to a person, I think.
Right.
Now, as he says, a lot of the people he served with came back as scrambled as Humpty Dumpty, because of PTSD. But not everybody comes back from war with PTSD. He came back with a much sharper sense in his own moral code of what's right and what's wrong. And there's a person out in New York City who's a pedophile and serial killer who has escaped justice on technicalities. And Nick decides he's going to take right and wrong into his own hands. But when he does, the world flips over, and suddenly he's offered a job to be the cop's cop or the city's fixer. And I'll leave it there.
All right.
Yeah.
So where does the book start off with then, in the sense of, if I open up and I'm reading page 1, chapter 1, am I starting with Nick in the coming back from the war? Is Nick already back and established himself? How?
I can tell you where you begin is there's a prologue. I'm one of the
Right.
few writers who knows how to use a prologue. No,
All right.
one of the few. I understand what prologues are for and epilogues are for. Too many. Here's a bit of read the writing, teacher. If you could take away the word prologue and put chapter 1,
Right.
it's prologue. A prologue has to be something that is tangential but related to the plot of the book. But it is not the beginning per se of the book. So if you opened up the book, you would find Nick working undercover, walking in a demonstration, a kind of Black Lives Matter demonstration, formed because a black teenager was shot and killed in Brooklyn, and there's a protest going on, and he's assigned undercover work to make sure to march along with the marchers, to watch out for any bombers or provocateurs in the demonstration. So that's where it begins. So Nick is already back on the job. He's come home from Afghanistan, and he's back at work. And the strange thing is, he is not a beloved cop. He may be a cop's cop, but he's not a beloved cop, because his father, who is a retired cop now, voluntarily testified in a police corruption investigation in front of a commission. So his father is considered a rat.
Okay.
And the son of a rat is a rat.
Is a rat.
So
All right.
Yeah.
So even the other cops on the force, even though he's the one that takes care of their problems, they don't trust him or like him. So what is the real, other than Nick having to deal with figuring out, I guess I'm guessing that he's going after this pedophile murderer guy in the story, but what's the other conflicts that he might face in there? Because
well, once he's offered the job, he turns it down. See, I don't want to give too much away. He turns it down, but then Nick, who obviously he was a soldier and understands duty, and he's a cop and he understands his duty, and even though he's turned the job down, when something arises that requires only the skills that he possesses, he can't help but take on that challenge, because it's his duty to the people of the city of New York. As his ex-girlfriend says to him, you always had a weak spot for the losers, and he says, not for the losers, for the lost. So Nick is always looking out for the little guy, because that's who he feels he must protect. So he has to deal with a guy he has 3 big things to deal with. One of them is a Bernie Madoff type character who's absconded with $1 billion. And the cops normally wouldn't care, except it's $1 billion from police, from uniform unions. All
right.
He has to deal with a Alex Jones type character, and he has to deal with the series of unarmed shootings. So I don't want to give too much away, but these are big issues that would cause a lot of consternation and trouble in a city like New York.
All right. Now, what makes Nick somebody that I'm going to get attracted to want to keep following through, in the sense of his character is somebody that, like hate, I want to either root for him or I want to at least see him make it through. What is it about him that's going to make me want that?
Well, he's almost as handsome as I am.
Well, there you go. That's all need to be said, right?
Isn't that enough? No. Well, that's the interesting thing is I want people to go for the ride with Nick, and
Right.
some people will love him, and some people won't. But as long as they go for the ride with him, that's what I'm interested in. So you have to make the plot obviously interesting enough to want people to know what's next, what's next, what's next. And let me put it like this about Nick. As his ex-girlfriend says, he has that obsession with the little guy, with the lost. Now, why his ex-girlfriend said that is she's wealthy, and he dated her for a very long time. So Nick has lived in both worlds. Nick has lived in the world of the wealthy and the powerful, and he's grew up in Brooklyn and from a family of cops. So one of the things that qualifies Nick to do his job, as one of his handlers says to him, sometimes we're going to need you to know the difference between the salad fork and the dinner fork. So his experiences are very interesting. So I think that's one of now here's a guy who's done 2 tours in Afghanistan, dated a very wealthy woman for a long time, cares about the little guy. He drives a '69 GTO and a classic Norton motorcycle. So he's cool, but he's vulnerable. So
Okay.
And he is almost as handsome as you. So
see, now sucking up to me.
well, I'm no fool.
So, with the story, is this similar to any of the other books you've written in the past? So, if there's somebody that says that they've enjoyed book A, B, all the way to Z and double A again, which one would you say this is similar to?
Oh, I would say it's dissimilar to. I would say they would recognize my authorial voice. They will recognize it as my writing. But
Right.
and what I was attracted to Nick about as a character is unlike my previous character, most of my previous protagonists like Mo Prager or Gus Murphy or Dylan Klein. As I described Dylan Klein to you, he's a kind of Bush League hackneyed insurance investigator.
Right.
Both Mo Prager and Gus Murphy were uniform cops, but never detectives. So that when circumstance called on them to kind of become private eyes, either amateurs or licensed, they didn't have the requisite skill. So they were stumblers, basically. They were well-intentioned, big-hearted, very intelligent stumblers. So they were always basically treading water and sometimes in way over their heads. Whereas Nick is ultra competent at what he does. He's good with weapons. He's good at martial arts. He was in the army. He's as I say in the book, there's the hurricane and there's the eye of the hurricane, and he is always in the eye. He's very calm. He knows what he's doing. So unlike Mo and Dylan and Gus, Nick was fun to write because for once I wrote a character who actually knows what he's doing. So that's, I wouldn't say he has a big heart like the other guys, but he is very different in terms of his police and detective skills from the other guys.
All right. Now, was Nick a cop before he went to Afghanistan,
Yeah.
or?
Yes.
Okay, so it was a transition of him coming back into a position that he was well aware, not just he got into it afterwards.
Correct. Correct.
Okay. Now, with this, where I guess you've written quite a few series from what I saw. Is this with the Sleepless City? Is this going to be the beginning of a series
Yeah,
as well?
yeah.
Or?
I've already written the second novel. It's called Blind to Midnight. And that'll be easier to pronounce for everybody.
That's good.
And hopefully there'll be more books. Yes, Nick is the kind of character that really lends himself to, and the job he has really lend themselves to a series.
All right, so I have to imagine right now Nick is probably your favorite character out of all your others at this point.
It's funny. Is the book you're writing is your favorite book? The character you're writing is your favorite character? But
Right.
I'm never just interested in writing one series. Like I could never do, I'm friendly with Lee Child, and I could never do 23 books in one series. I imagine if they paid me what they pay Lee, I might
Yeah.
be tempted to do it, but I would have a hard time doing it because my mind tends to wander a bit. Like I love Nick, but I'm also interested in that. I'm interested in this. So I've actually during the pandemic written 3 other books. So
So
yeah.
let me ask this as well: is your book do you write in a first person style, or what kind of viewpoint are we looking at in Sleepless City?
In Sleepless City, Sleepless City, Sleepless City, Sleepless City, I write in third person,
Okay.
but I've also written in third person and I've written in second person. Boy, is that a challenge.
Yeah.
Second person, yeah. Just because it was a challenge and I wanted to see if I could do it. Yeah, I think, all 3 of those, mostly first and third, they give you different opportunities. Like if you write in first person, it's very intimate.
Right.
Very intimate. It's me and you. It's even though I'm writing for, hopefully hundreds of thousands of people.
Right.
Plus my wife and my kid, my
And the
friend,
friend you tricked.
right, who runs away. It's very much as my author friend Peter Spiegelman once said. He said, your first person voice feels like you're talking to somebody in the next seat as you're driving cross country, telling a story to the person. So it's very intimate. But the only way the audience ever can get information is from the first person narrator. And that's very restrictive. So you can never know what the bad guy's thinking, what his girlfriend is thinking, what his kids are thinking. So the only way you can get that information is from him or her or they, as it might be.
Right.
Third person is great because, you can make it intimate, but you can also make it omniscient, where the narrator knows everything about everybody,
Right.
So it's just like how character suggests plot to me. Once character and plot are there, kind of forming plot and setting and stuff, the book suggests to me, is this person better? What perspective will work here? So I never go, this is the first person, this is third person, this is I have to see how it, and Nick Ryan, I actually tried Sleepless City first person, a little bit, thought, yeah, that worked, but it would work much better if I did it in third.
I understand. And I know some stories, they are better in third than first just because the overarching plots and everything going on, there's things that the first person just wouldn't know that the reader needs to know to understand the story. So that makes sense to me. Now, with your other books, where where do you place those as in the sense of something that you feel people are going to want to drive into to want to, where do they want to, where would you suggest people dive into to get to know your stories?
Well, I suggest they buy all 32 books in hardcover.
Understand.
Immediately, all
this
at once.
Second. Yes.
You know, obviously, since Sleepless City is the first in a series with
Right.
books to come, that's an interesting place for people to start. So if they, think I'm funny or I have intelligent things to say, during this, and other than kissing up to you,
Right.
I say Sleepless City is a good place to start because it's my newest. It's a new series, so they don't have to say which book should I read in the series. The other two books I would suggest, if they're gonna, after Sleepless City, would be my first Gus Murphy book called Where It Hurts, which won the Shamus Award and was nominated for the Edgar and the Thriller Award.
All right.
And Walking the Perfect Square, which is my first Mo Prager novel. So those are the three books that I might suggest, because Where It Hurts and Walking the Perfect Square are the first books in series. So you're meeting the character. Same notion as why I would suggest that people read Sleepless City first.
Okay. Now, you mentioned humor, and, for me, I've come to find that there's, like, for the longest time, I was very much not a big fan of reading crime fiction, but I started finding some authors with humorous side to their writings.
Right.
Do you add humor? Is it, and I'm assuming you do from your comment, but I guess the bigger question is if you add humor, what kind of humor are you adding? Is it
I never add humor. I never.
Okay.
Add humor. Everything I write has to be organic to what's going on. So if the situation calls for humor, there's humor. But I will never just for the hell of it throw in, and I never do that. I never throw in a body because joy, or I never have a guy walk through a door with a gun because the plot seems like it's sagging. I never do that stuff. That's why I don't outline. I know you didn't want to talk about this stuff. This is why I never outline, because it's always as I write. What's occurring to me as I'm writing it is what goes in the book.
Understand. I kind of picked up from our conversation that you were more of a pantser than an outliner.
Yes, my pants are very worn.
I guess the better question is, and do you add humor, is what kind of humor develops in your stories? Is it sarcastic? Is it you have the class clown kind of thing? I know, heaven forbid.
Yeah, I mean, it's organic to the character. So character, with cops, it's often dark humor, because gallows humor is what is cops humor.
Right.
With a guy like Mo Prager, he and his brother own a wine store. He's a private detective, a former cop, so he kind of hates the wine business, but he's in it because he's with his brother. And his humor will be sarcasm about how different his brother is than him. So it's always about the character and the story, and it suggests it to me. So,
all right. So now, with that, I have a feeling you're one of these people, especially with 32 books and a long reading list for people to start with. I don't want to take up all your time, and I feel we could really go for quite some time and still have fun with the conversation. I have a profile on you, or for you, on authorblurb.com where people can find you. It has all the links, everything you've given me. Where do you prefer people to find you, reach out to you if they want to bother you, harass you, find your books? What's your favorite place to send them?
Well, they can always write to me, and I will always answer. Maybe not the way they want, but I will always answer. They can get in touch with me at reedcoleman.com. I'm on Facebook. I have someone tweet for me, so it's not really me. I don't enjoy Twitter, so it's just not a place for me. And the reason I can write 32 books plus all the books I wrote during the pandemic is because I don't spend my whole life on social media.
Right.
Yeah. So if you want to, my books are sold everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, if you want to get in touch with me at reedcoleman.com, just write to me and I will answer you. I answered you.
You very well did. So, and I'm very happy of that. So, I'll have a link to your website in the show notes as well. So, with that, thank you for being here. If you can hold on for just a few moments, we'll talk for a few moments more, but this will be the end of conversation for everyone else.
Great. Well, thanks for having me, and I really appreciate it. And please write to me and buy my books because my other friends won't.
Well, I know you have one sale here, at least when Sleepless City comes out. So I do appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.
You can go to authorblurb.com where there's plenty of stuff there for you to find. Enjoy another author. Enjoy finding that book that you love. So take the time, do me a favor, share, subscribe, enjoy the show, and tell others. Thank you.